If you feel that someone is smart and that they know what they're talking about, and that when they say something and you go back and fact check it, it's actually true, that's probably a good sign that they know what they're talking about. Just because someone says something confidently and because they have letters after their name, especially in wine, does not mean that they are an expert.
I'm your host, Brian McCann, and this is the Road to Wine Expert podcast. Welcome back to the Road to Wine Expert podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. Instead of hearing from just one person, we are going to hear from many of the guests you may have already listened to and preview some guests that are coming up for the rest of season 1. The goal here is to highlight some thoughts on education. Wine education, I wouldn't say it's necessarily controversial, but certainly everyone has an opinion. I think what's interesting is the people interviewed in the Road to Wine Expert Summit, despite their diverse backgrounds, actually settle somewhere towards the middle. It's pretty nice to see that there's this logical conclusion that wine education, both formal and informal, has value. And more importantly, there's no one way to become a wine expert. So rather than have me tell you or just hear from one person, I thought it'd be kind of cool to cut up some clips. So throughout this episode, I'll introduce people as they cut in and out, and we'll cover some different topics that cover wine education. So let's get started. When I was in college, I had an amazing creative writing teacher who always said, endings are as important as beginnings. And when I created the Road to Wine Expert Summit, I had endings in mind. But the truth is, most of us are looking for help when we're at the beginning, when we're just getting started. So let's turn it over to Elizabeth Schneider, host of the Wine for Normal People podcast, and listen to how she got started in wine education.
When I lived with my sister, who's similar to me in this regard, she's an attorney, and the two of us lived together, and we were like, let's learn about wine. We waste so much money on bad wine. We have no idea what we're talking about. My dad was kind of a real snot about wine with us, and he was like, oh, I love this Barolo, Brunello. We were like, what are you even, we don't know. So we took this class through the Boston Center for Adult Education, and there was this guy, I will never forget him for as long as I live, John Miller, and he worked for a distributor, and he broke it down. I mean, he was like, you know what, this is wine. He was like a little bit rough around the edges. I don't know what he's like now, but he seemed to me, he wasn't like, it wasn't a snot. He wasn't like the people that worked in the wine stores that I had this policy. There were 2 wine stores on the way home from the tea, like from work. I worked in technology at that time. And, I would stop in one of them, and if anybody asked me any questions I couldn't answer, or like I felt like I was going to hyperventilate because there was so much choice, which is usually the case, I would just be like, you know what, I gotta go. And then the next one, like I would just have to pick something that was in my price range, and I would just pretty much buy the same thing every time, or I was just afraid to taste it. I was afraid they would ask me what I thought. It was just a very pressure cooker environment. So this guy was like showing us Alsace and Viognier, and he was showing us, stuff from Burgundy, and we understood the difference between grapes and regions. And it was cool. Like I really looked forward to Tuesday nights. I remember it was on a Tuesday night, and I just fell in love with Alsace Riesling. It was a Trimbach Alsace Riesling. I thought it was the most fascinating, interesting wine. I'm still a total Riesling lover. This was a very long time ago. I still love the grape. I still love Alsace Riesling. It's my go-to wine. When I met Jean Trimbach, I thought I was going to like pass out. It was such a fangirl moment. It was hilarious. He was wearing lederhosen, I think. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. And then after that, I decided that I really wanted to do something in wine, but it's really hard to figure out what you can do like from the outside. You're in technology and you're thinking like, what do I do? I have a college degree. I don't even know what people do in wine. I don't understand this industry. It's a very insider industry. I didn't even know that you could go work in a wine shop and that could get you in the industry. I didn't know anything. And at this point, I'd lost John Miller's information, so I couldn't even ask him. So I decided to do what I was going to do anyway, which was get my MBA. And I, of course, did what everybody does before they get their MBA. I moved to St. John in the Caribbean and waited tables for 8 months. Doesn't everybody do that?
So while Elizabeth went off to an island to find herself and her next move in wine, we'll shift gears and go to another island, the United Kingdom, and meet Richard Hemming, a master of wine, and hear how he got his start.
I did an English degree and had no career plans. So took a job in a wine shop because I figured it sounded interesting and I had no prior knowledge of wine whatsoever. Stayed with them for 6 years and they're very good. They gave you the training of the WSET courses. So I took my diploma with them and I got as far as I wanted to. And then in 2007, I at the time, I wasn't married. I had no mortgage. I had no responsibilities, basically. So I took the opportunity to go traveling. I went to Australia and I worked in a wine shop there. And then I did vintage. And while I was doing vintage, I started writing a diary of my experiences, which I sent to Jancis pretty much out of the blue. Well, in fact, totally out of the blue. I had never met her. I didn't know her at all. She didn't know who I was. But she published them, and it went on from there.
So in the case of Elizabeth and Richard, they found wine education around the same time they were finding the industry. But for Wanda Mann, the black dress traveler, the story is a little different.
I don't think it's a requirement of the industry, and I definitely know somms who've been working at this for 20, 30 years who have no CSW, no WSET credentials, and they're full of knowledge. I think for me, just because I've always been a bit of a nerd and I find myself missing school, this opportunity to really sit down and do a self-study course and put together all of this different information. I mean, I'll be honest, in the beginning, when winemakers are throwing around terms like malolactic fermentation or, talking about, polyphenols and all of these things, I would kind of discreetly write them in my notebook and then go home and look these things up. And I was like, there has to be a better way. There has to be a course that I can do that will work with my schedule. So Society of Wine Educators, offers this option to study for the CSW. And I like the idea that it was self-study. You have a year from the time that you register to take the test. There is a weekly online study group, which was amazing, with an amazing instructor, Professor Jane, and she's fabulous. And it really helped to put all of these technical terms together. Also, you learn more geography than you ever will in your life. I mean, I've never been someone who was really adept with the map, but suddenly, you're looking at these maps and you're learning history. So even though CSW is not as advanced as having a WSET diploma, it really, for me, I felt gave me a stronger foundation. I felt more comfortable with technical terms, and it was just fun. It was just fun. So I recommend it. It's not a terribly expensive course. And over the course of a year, I would say, I'll be honest, I didn't start studying for it right away. I realized, oh my goodness, I paid for this and I have about 4 months before it expires. I better start studying. So I probably really cranked down and studied 3 to 4 months before I took the test, and probably studied about, depending on the week, 6 to 10 hours a week.
We're already starting to get pretty deep in this podcast, and Wanda just revealed yet another acronym. And when you're trying to make sense of all the wine education programs out there, you'll see a lot of different letters that mean all slightly different things. So Wanda was just talking about the CSW, or the Certified Specialist in Wine. You heard Richard Hemming talk about WSET. That's the Wine, Spirit, and Educational Trust. And as you move on, we might hear about MS. That's a Master Sommelier, and that's an affiliation with the Court of Master Sommeliers. And you might hear about an MW, and that's a Master of Wine. And if you're totally new and it's your first time here, you've probably heard the word Somm quite a few times, and you'll hear it a few more. And that means sommelier, which is kind of a loaded question if you ask what that means. You can think of someone with a ton of wine knowledge working in a restaurant, helping customers navigate the wine list. So speaking of acronyms, let's kick it over to a man who knows a lot about them. That's James Kluwer, MW, Master of Wine, who has a company called Fine Vintage, who operates about a dozen different WSET schools.
Then wine is great because, you can learn so much by yourself. They're reading books and magazines, and there's often a lot of events, wine tastings, trade tastings, supplier visits, coming through, major cities or significant sized cities. But, if you really put your mind to it, you can basically teach yourself. And in fact, a lot of it is self-taught, right? I mean, you don't just sort of take a WSET course and know it all. In fact, you never know it all, of course. I mean, I would generally guess that I might know less than 1% of what there is to know about wine. In fact, I can guarantee you I know probably less than 0.001% of what there is to know about wine. I would say I've got the general idea, frankly. On the education front, I wish I'd gone to a formal institute, and I still might, like UC Davis or Adelaide University, and learned, being formally trained by a sort of a wine post-secondary institute. Sort of, if I was working a vintage at a winery, and I do, 1 day or 1 week in the lab, and then, 1 day or 1 week on the crush pad, and then 1 day and 1 week, in the cellar, sort of doing the pump overs or whatever, right? And so move through the entire sort of cycle or chain of the whole wine business as much as you can, in marketing, sales, domestic sales, and export sales, and logistics, and just try and touch every aspect of it, or as many as possible.
James really touches on the core of the issue at hand, which is that wine knowledge is vast. So if it's big and hard to tackle, what sort of strategies can we put in place? Let's turn it back over to Richard Hemming.
Is the fact that so much of wine expertise relies on experience, and to quite a large extent, you can only get experience with every new vintage, so it just takes time. I mean, of course, if you have the resources and the opportunity, you can go and taste hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Burgundies, for example, but realistically, most of us don't have that opportunity. And so the only way to develop your expertise and have a reputation is with time. And I remember finding that very frustrating when I was starting out, because my attitude was like, yeah, but I'm young. So surely that trumps experience, right? Look at all these old guys. They know everything, and but they're old. People want to hear from someone like me. I'm not so sure that's true. I think people really value experience above everything. And, that is especially true for wine. So my advice would be, have patience. You really have to be in it for the long haul. And it's, especially if you're trying to look at the writing world, it's not going to pay out for quite some time. But I don't really see how you can speed that up.
I mean, I could end the podcast right there and say, be patient, but I don't know. I feel like that does a disservice, because there are certain aspects of your career you can speed up. I mean, for example, let's listen to Richard Betts, who's someone who passed the Master Sommelier on his first attempt.
So at that point, I was also working on the Master Sommelier exam, and sorry, this is the long path to answer your question, how I ended up making wine. But worked through the Court of Master Sommeliers program, and in 2003, I took the master's exam for the first time and passed. So I was that lucky kid to get it done on the first try. And it's really myopia as much as luck. I worked hard on it, and got through it. And then the next day I didn't wake up happy. I woke up feeling like something was missing. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, that's an interesting thing. You just had this huge professional and personal milestone, and you're not happy. What's up with that? So I found that, I looked at my rhythm, and my rhythm was wake up, exercise, study, go to work, go to sleep, repeat. But exercise doesn't mean, ski. I didn't ski the year before I passed my advanced, and I didn't miss a day of studying. I just woke up the next day and kept studying for the masters, and didn't ski then either. It was really focused on passing this thing. And so I looked at that and that professional or personal, I guess drive, that piece of you that has to chew on something, didn't have anything to chew on because the test is over. So I needed something else to chew on, and I thought, well, it's one thing to read about wine, and it's another thing entirely to get dirty. So let's get dirty. And it was that summer I founded my first wine company called Betts and Scholl, and we started making wine in Australia. And then we added Hermitage in France, in the Northern Rhone Valley. Then we added California, making some wine in Napa, and
so Richard Betts really uncovers something important, which is that studying for wine exams is not glamorous. In fact, it's really hard work. Between the flashcards, the late nights, tasting a bunch of different wine, it's not all great. But there are some fun parts to it. So who better than Hilary Zio, author of The Unfiltered Guide to Working in Wine, to shed a little light on the fun parts of studying for wine exams.
Don't be afraid to reach out like you did and be like, how can I learn from you? Like they will tell you, they will be like, I do need free help, and I can totally use you, you know what I mean? And you're going to take mine all, because that's always part of it, right? So sometimes it's like, yes, we'll work for wine, because that's going to eventually teach you and develop your palate. So I think just really being open and not closed-minded about it. Just try whatever. Take your time, see what you think. At least that's what I think. Training that kind of take, like, I'm going to do a week of only Southern Italian wines, and then next week I'm going to try this. Like, it's cool to see that, because you notice big differences when you change over to another region or style or something. I did when I was first starting, I could not tell the difference between Champagne and Prosecco and Cava. It was just sparkling. Like, that was just how it tasted to me. So I did the same thing. I was like, all right, I'm going to have Cava for a week, and then I'm going to have Champagne for a week. It was not cheap, obviously. But then after the Champagne week, I went to Prosecco and Cava, and I was like, this sucks. You know what I mean? Like, you realize what quality is if you are forced. Like, if you don't understand why a wine is so expensive, try something in the same style or region, and then and you realize, okay, wow, yeah, this has been aged in oak a very long time, or this was made, in the best way, or whatever it is. And
tasting exceptional wine is a great reminder while you're studying for these exams that you're doing the right thing. And it's that bright light at the end of a seemingly endless tunnel of knowledge. So if you're there and you're taking the tests, what do these accreditations mean? And how do you rank one versus the other? I don't know if I've heard a better take on this than that from Elizabeth Schneider.
This is in any field. You have to determine who you think is a smart person, right? I mean, we can look at, and not to get to it like a thorny issue, but you can look at politics, right? You can look at politics and you could say, okay, the writer at the Washington Post is a total expert on the White House. He knows everything. He knows about, the ins and outs, and I really trust his judgment. But the guy at the Chicago Trib sucks, and I totally don't trust him. And there could be somebody who feels the exact opposite. There could be somebody that thinks the New York Times is fake news, and somebody that thinks that, Newsmax is fake news. So we pick our own experts. Again, it goes back to this wine tribe thing. If you feel that someone is smart and that they know what they're talking about, and that when they say something and you go back and fact check it, it's actually true, that's probably a good sign that they know what they're talking about. Just because someone says something confidently and because they have letters after their name, especially in wine, does not mean that they are an expert. It means that they do know a lot, or that they knew a lot to pass a test. I mean, let me ask you this, Brian. How many exams did you take in college where you still remember everything, or high school where you still remember everything?
Yeah, that's going to be close to zero.
So what do you think happens? And some of the stuff, right, you use.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I think you probably use like addition, subtraction, spelling.
Sure.
So you ace those. You did really well on those. You're still doing okay. But beyond that, I think that, people in large part don't use all of that information. And when you're talking about an exam like a Master Sommelier, the Master of Wine is a little different because it's more like a master's program, right? It's actually an intellectual master's program where you write a dissertation and you develop expertise in one particular area. But the Master Sommelier, or any of the sommelier courses that go up to that, the WSET, the Certified Specialist of Wine, any of those are courses that you take that I think are excellent for people like me who are study nerds and like school and like structure and like words. Okay. If you don't like words and you don't like maps and it's frustrating to you, and yet you have a phenomenal palate and you can describe wine wonderfully well, how does that make you any less of an expert because I'm good at school and you're not? You're not, it's not your thing. I don't see that. I think wine is a sensory thing. How could you judge someone based on that? How can you judge someone based on how you hear descriptions of a wine and whether or not you think that's valid? I mean, when we all have different taste experiences, we all have different DNA. I mean, how is that any less experty than somebody who was a master sommelier and who just did really awesome because they do well under pressure? They like the testing. They can describe the wines, how they're supposed to do them. And, they follow their grid and they've got their timeline down. I mean, some people just don't do well under pressure. Some people can't taste well under pressure. Some people can write beautiful, amazing tasting notes if you gave them time, but that's not what they're asking you to do. So I think we need to reevaluate, especially in America. We don't see this elsewhere. The celebrity culture around that we seem to be building around sommeliers and around people who know things but aren't even that good at explaining them. Like if you're a great communicator about wine, then shouldn't you be getting credit for that in a restaurant or anywhere else? I know that if I sat down at a table, I would much rather have somebody who was awesome and knowledgeable and helpful than a master sommelier who didn't have any of those qualities but had the credentials. Do you see what I'm saying?
We do, Elizabeth. And I love the conclusion she reaches about communication. After all, this is really what it's all about. Whether it's an audience, a guest at a restaurant, a friend, a family member, the people who make us most excited about wine communicate and deliver those messages best. And wine is ultimately a conversation. And when you give, you get back. James Kluwer can share some insight on exactly that.
Everybody's going to bring their own perspective. Some people are sort of almost there just very peripheral, sort of casually, and just want to, pick up a few tips. And then there's other people like yourself that, really leads, to the next level and the next level. And then all of a sudden, we see them in the Master of Wine program, or they've started a business or something along those lines. And I would say that, we sort of started the wine education really somewhat out of sort of an income necessity, and sort of not too many other options that were apparent. But today, I'm so now, 12 plus years on, I'm so happy because on a daily basis, we receive so many emails. In fact, we've had to hire someone to handle these emails because I just can't, reply myself all day long, literally 3, 4, 5 a day. And they all say the same thing, how, these courses and this experience has effectively changed their life.
My first WSET Level 1 course did change my life, and it proved to me that I was doing the right thing by chasing down this crazy wine dream. But before you can chase down the crazy wine dream, you need to have the crazy wine dream. Here's Richard Hemming again.
Really simple answer, which is nobody should do it unless they personally really, really want to be doing it. It doesn't matter what their background is or their age or their level of knowledge. If people don't have a personal motivation to do it, I believe that they can't pass because you have to be so committed. So I would say that it is literally possible for anybody to do it. There are certain provisos in that now you have to be a working member of the trade, and that wasn't true until recently. But, assuming you fulfill the criteria, I would really encourage everyone who feels like they want to do it to go right ahead and do it. And it's for sure not easy, but if you have that personal motivation, you'll see it through. And I don't care how smart or experienced you are, if you don't really care, then you probably won't see it through. And I have encountered some people who they're doing it because their company is paying, or they're doing it because they got a bit bored, and these guys are not enjoying it, and that they're not graduating, they're not seeing it through. And that's a shame. It's a waste of time and money for everyone.
I have to admit, I was a little cheeky with my edit. That was Richard's answer to who should pursue the Master of Wine. But I kind of believe it's true for everybody who's considering wine education. If you don't have the passion and you're not serious about it, don't bother. I'll never forget when I took the intro somm in Orlando. There's a guy next to me who was a DNA scientist or something crazy. And I thought, oh wow, this guy's kind of like me and looking to get into wine to change his career. But he spent the entire intro somm on his phone, on Tinder. I think he kind of missed the point. But if you're curious at all, that shouldn't stop you from trying. Here's Wanda again.
It's true. It's true. Yes, I encourage anyone to look. It's not a requirement, but I think if people are curious, at least explore the intro WSET or CSW.
Yeah.
And especially if you want to write about wine, I really found for me, it just improved, my writing tremendously to be able to back up what I kind of intuitively was feeling about a wine, because it is a lot of information. And the exam, at least when I took it, and I think it's the same, it's all distilled down to 100 questions that you have an hour to answer. And when you're talking about, the old world regions, new world, viticulture, geography, it's you just have no idea what those 100 questions will be. So, and the pass rate, I was surprised I passed it on the first go around, because I heard that a lot of people don't.
I think we've sort of hit on the point that these tests are hard. And that alone is sort of motivation enough to pass them for most people. But it also might prevent people from trying. And I think one of the things that made me want to pass my exam was beyond the intrinsic motivation I had, but was putting cash and money on the line. I had to buy a hotel, a plane ticket, and a rental car, plus register for the intro somm test in Florida. Beyond just the expense, there was that feeling of, what if I come back empty-handed without a piece of paper and a pen? And what if I did all that for 10 minutes in the sunshine. You know, it's not really a vacation. It was a destination. It was a milestone in learning about wine. So you've got to set that target date. And if you're going to do this thing, you got to go all in. Hillary reiterates this message.
I think that it's for like maybe 90% of people. And the reason I say it is because if you don't have a test coming up, you're just like not forced to study the wine regions of New Zealand. So you might not think of it, right? You might just be like, okay, let's dig into France and learn everything about Burgundy and Bordeaux and the Loire Valley and call it a day. You don't realize like what else there is. So it definitely like makes you kind of buckle down and learn.
So how do you put a bow on wine education? And in a total cop-out move, I'll say it's a lot like being a wine expert. There's no right way, there's no one path, and you kind of got to figure it out for yourself. I think the first thing you can do is start. Pick up a book, listen to a podcast, find something you like, and see what that person did. The cool part about this podcast is I tried to figure that out myself. So take a look at our guest list. I'm sure you'll find someone who will motivate you to learn about wine. Also, if it's your first time here, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to earlier episodes and subscribe so you can listen to future episodes featuring many of the speakers you've heard here already. If you've got questions about wine, you can reach out to me directly on Facebook and Instagram. Just search Road to Wine Expert. Or you can hit me up on email, and that's Brian, BRIAN, at roadtowineexpert.com. If you like this episode, leave us a review on iTunes to let us know you'd like to hear more cool content featuring diverse speakers rather than just a singular interview. Ultimately, I want this podcast to serve you, the audience, so any feedback will help us make this better. Cheers, and thanks again for listening.